He said he saw me, swore it under oath. But the footage from camera 12 caught him somewhere else, alone, at the evidence locker. And the moment the prosecutor ordered the timestamp comparison, everything began to crack. I remember the lights above the corridor flickering that morning, the kind of sickly green that makes every decision feel wrong before you even make it. My keycard buzzed twice before the door opened, as if the building itself was reluctant to let me in. I was 15 minutes early, but early didn't mean safe in our unit. Not anymore. The HR office smelled of printer ink and stale air. My chair groaned as I sat. On my desk, an open manila folder I hadn't left there, a contract printed in bold, unsigned. Someone wanted it to look like I'd been reviewing it all along. My gut tightened. This wasn't carelessness. It was staging. 2 desks down, Morales looked up from his Excel report. One of those guys who lived for formulas and watched every move like his spreadsheet would auto-update with gossip. I kept my expression flat, neutral, like we were on Zoom with internal affairs again. No weakness, not this week. The phone rang once, then stopped. I stared at the blinking cursor on my screen and tried to breathe. At 08:03, I got the email. Subject, Witness Testimony Review, ma'am. You've been named in a witness statement as present at the South Lot at 14:16 yesterday. Please confirm or deny. Timestamp enclosed. D. Alvarez, Deputy Prosecutor. My fingers hovered above the keyboard. South Lot. At 14:16 yesterday, I was inside the armory, submitting forms next to the evidence locker. There were 2 cameras in that hallway, camera 11 and camera 12. If those feeds were still active, they'd prove it. But that meant trusting that no one had pulled the footage or tampered with it. At 08:09, I messaged the IT desk. Can I get camera 12 footage from 14 or 14:30 yesterday? Need confirmation of location. Internal review. R. Keller, Officer 1627. They didn't reply. Not at 08:30, not at 09:0. At 09:11, I walked down to records myself. The guy at the desk looked nervous. His screen was angled away. Just checking on a request, I said calmly. Camera 12, from yesterday. He blinked too many times. Oh, that file's been submitted already to, the prosecutor's office by Captain Rowe. My stomach dropped. Rowe? He was the one who'd fought against installing cameras 11 and 12 in the first place, claimed budget concerns, though we all knew it was about blind spots. And if he submitted the footage before I could even ask for it. What time did he request it? The tech hesitated. 06:47, this morning. I walked out without another word. The hallway was colder now, or maybe that was just adrenaline whispering that I'd been set up. And if they were submitting that tape before I even knew about the accusation, it meant someone had coordinated this in advance. I reached for my phone and pulled up the footage request logs. The chain of custody showed Rowe's digital signature at 06:47:14, camera 12, delivered to the prosecutor via secure email channel. But there was something else, a duplicate submission request from my ID, time-stamped after his, but flagged as denied duplicate request. I stared at the entry. Someone didn't want me to see that footage. At 10:34, I finally saw it. The footage Rowe submitted was broadcast in the review room. One angle, no audio. It showed the hallway, but only for 12 seconds. I was gone. The tape cut from 14:15:38 to 14:27:10. The middle? Missing. And in that gap was the minute that mattered. I didn't know it yet, but someone had planned this for weeks, and they left just enough behind to make me look guilty. I didn't sleep that night. The walls of my apartment felt like they were leaning in, pressing against my skin with every unanswered email, every thread that didn't lead anywhere. I lay on the couch with a notepad on my chest, scribbling timestamps and initials, trying to piece together the bones of a trap someone else had built around me. By 06 Miao, I was dressed and standing in front of the precinct like a suspect waiting to be called in. The air was wet and heavy. Fog clung to the edges of the streetlights, casting halos over silence. I walked in as the night shift clocked out, eyes flicking toward me, but no one daring to speak. They'd all seen the internal memo by now. At 06:17, I entered the review room. No windows, just a desk, 2 chairs, and a wall monitor. The U.S. Marshal's seal flickered on the corner of the screen, waiting for remote login. 2 minutes later, I heard the door click. It was Alvarez, deputy prosecutor, worn suit, calm hands. But I knew better. That man could order a timestamp comparison like he was ordering coffee. And the fallout would still smell like blood. "Officer Keller," he greeted, "we're verifying a discrepancy between the submitted footage and the sworn testimony." "Let me guess," I said. "The footage is incomplete, and the witness insists I was there." Alvarez tilted his head slightly. "You've seen the camera log?" "I've seen enough." He clicked a remote. Camera 12's feed reappeared. But this time, the Marshal's system overlay showed in red. Timestamp comparison requested, primary source. Evidence locker hallway, submitted footage. Duration, 0/12, missing segment, 14:15:38 to 14:27:10. User submission, Captain Rowe, ID 0442. Alvarez didn't speak. He just let the silence stretch like wire between us. I leaned forward. "You think I was erased from the tape?" "No," he said flatly. "We think you were never on it to begin with." That was worse. I forced myself to breathe. The witness said he saw me in the south lot. That would be 2 floors down. At 1416? Correct, but now the question becomes, where were you really? "I was in the hallway, evidence locker, filing." I swallowed. "With Officer Crane." Alvarez checked a printed form. "His statement doesn't place you there." I froze. "What?" "He said you passed by him around 1410 and didn't return." That wasn't just a missing detail. That was a pivot. Crane knew I was under review. He knew how precise timestamps worked. If he shifted my presence by even 6 minutes, my entire alibi dissolved. The screen shifted, the U.S. Marshal login engaged, and a new label appeared. Perjury review. Initiated witness, Officer Lennox. Statement. Time-stamped 1702, prior day. Lennox. I clenched my fists in my lap. Lennox was desk duty. He rarely left his corner of the admin bay unless a copier exploded or someone needed a witness for a printer refill log. He was not in the south lot. He was never anywhere near where this supposedly happened. And yet he swore, under oath, that he personally saw me there. At 1416, I closed my eyes and exhaled. "Sir, I'd like to request a cross-check of keycard access logs between 14:00 and 14:30, mine and Lennox's." Alvarez raised a brow. "Why Lennox's?" "Because if he says he saw me in the south lot, he would have needed clearance through 2 internal security doors. And that would have logged." He paused, then opened a new window on his tablet. A few swipes, silence, then a frown. "Lennox didn't badge through any doors after 1344. I didn't smile. I wanted to. But this wasn't a win. It was a crack in a lie. And lies, when exposed, fight back hard. At 0709, the U.S. Marshal signed the red-stamped order. "Witness fabricated." The email went out. Subject, "Perjury confirmed, Officer Lennox." But I didn't relax, because a man like Lennox doesn't lie on his own, not in this unit, not unless someone handed him a script and promised a promotion. And if this was just the beginning, someone bigger was still pulling the strings. The tape wasn't the only thing they planned to erase. She caught the first lie. But how deep does this thing go? If you felt that chill, subscribe. We're only getting started. Truth has a timestamp. Stay tuned. The badge reader outside HR flickered red again. Third time this week. My access hadn't been officially revoked, but someone behind the scenes was trying to lock me out, one door at a time. I walked away without pausing. When they start closing physical doors on you, it's never about security. It's about message control, and whoever was orchestrating this had access to more than just footage. They were rewriting the building itself. I ducked into the side stairwell and headed for archives. It smelled like metal filings and warm toner, and it was one of the last places no one bothered to bug. Not because it was secure, but because no one thought a copier graveyard could be useful. I found Sylvia crouched beside the old fax machine, pulling staples out of case folders. "You got a second?" I asked. She didn't look up. "Depends. Are you still radioactive?" "Only if you breathe near the evidence locker." That got a twitch of a smile. I sat on the low file cabinet, the kind that always tilted to one side, and dropped my voice. "I need access logs, not just mine, Crane's, Rowe's, and anyone who touched camera 12's footage in the last 48 hours. Sylvia finally looked at me. "You're digging under their floors. They already set fire to mine." She sighed, wiped her hands on her skirt, and tapped a few keys into the ancient HR access console that still ran on some forgotten version of Windows. "I can't give you the logs," she said, "but I can let you look at a screen, accidentally." That's how it worked now. Everything had to be an accident. Everything had to look like noise. She turned the monitor toward me. I leaned in. At 06:43, 4 minutes before Captain Rowe requested the footage, someone else accessed the chain of custody for camera 12. ID not listed, just a placeholder. System, external override. I pointed. "Who's that?" She shook her head. "That's not normal. That's not anyone. That's a ghost override. We only see that when someone from outside the precinct uses admin layer 2 access." "Who has that?" "Tech security, internal affairs, maybe marshals. But they'd have to declare it in writing. That's logged." I snapped a photo of the screen. Sylvia didn't stop me. "Check this," she said, tapping again. "There's more. Another override. This one at 06:59, 13 minutes after Rowe submitted the footage. This time, the log read, exported copy generated, camera 12, file tagged, review, cleaned.mp4. Destination, local printer D14. I stared. Someone printed the video? "No," Sylvia said slowly. "Not printed, exported and transcoded." I sat back. "Why the printer label then?" She hesitated. "Sometimes they route file exports through unused printer queues. It avoids triggering auto notifications. Think of it like a backdoor tunnel." "Who's D14 assigned to?" She tapped a key. "Captain Rowe." Of course it was. At 07:22 that morning, Rowe printed a signed summary memo to the prosecutor's office that claimed camera 12 footage had been reviewed, cleaned for clarity, and matched witness testimony provided under oath by Officer Lennox. There was even a screenshot attached to the memo. Me, blurry, near the outer parking lot, except I'd never been there. And now, they'd manufactured it. At 08:08, I stood outside the evidence locker. Crane was inside, filing a report. I waited until he turned and saw me. "You lied in your statement," I said quietly. His eyes darted. "Excuse me?" "You said I passed you at 14:10. You know I didn't. I was there at 14:16. You know because you signed the log next to me." Crane stiffened. "I don't recall that." "That's fine," I said, "because the timestamp on your signature does." He froze. I stepped closer. "You still have time to fix this before it goes federal." Crane didn't answer, but his face drained of color. By 10:41, Alvarez called me. Crane requested to amend his statement, he said. That's when I knew. The cracks were getting wider, and something underneath them was starting to scream. They edited the footage, they printed the lie, but they forgot I know how to read printers. The room where we kept the physical logbooks was colder than the rest of the building, always had been. They said it was because of the servers below. But I knew better. Paper doesn't lie, so the air had to stay still, heavy, like truth waiting for a fingerprint. I found the logbook with the matte black spine, the one assigned to the evidence locker for physical entries. Because while digital records can be wiped, overwritten, rerouted through fake printer queues and zip folders labeled meeting minutes, no one ever thinks to erase the ink. Page 248, March 11th, Crane's signature, and mine, same line, same minute, 1416. I took a photo and immediately uploaded it to my private cloud. Encrypted, off-network. If they wanted to disappear me, they'd have to disappear physics next. Back at my desk, I opened the internal dashboard and ran a trace on Rowe's activity between 0630 and 0730 that morning, the window between his override request and the time-stamped memo to the prosecutor. It wasn't authorized for me, but I'd memorized the backdoor path during our last systems audit. He'd logged into Terminal C. Then, less than 6 minutes later, he accessed a folder marked Training Archive 2119. My mouth went dry. That folder contained old footage used for onboarding, blurred videos of hallway traffic, sometimes even staged incidents to teach new hires how to write proper reports. No active cases, no real timestamps, just noise, unless you needed to borrow a face. I pulled the folder and started scrubbing through the frames. On clip number 5, I saw myself. Shorter hair, different badge number, walking through a parking lot in 2019. They'd taken that frame, reprocessed it, blurred it just enough and dropped it in. Review cleaned.mp4 was a Frankenstein tape. I leaned back, breathing sharp through my nose. It wasn't just misconduct. It was digital forgery. Fabricated evidence submitted to a federal prosecutor under chain of custody. That meant prison time, if it reached the right ears, and for that, I needed someone who couldn't be silenced. I emailed the U.S. Marshal's office, specifically the Timestamp Verification Division, with the flagged clip, a screenshot of the 2019 archive match, and the print log metadata from Sylvia's screen. 30 seconds later, I got the auto reply. Thank you. Your submission has been received. Your case number is DERSH TVC 4217A. A federal investigator has been assigned. I closed the laptop, locked it in my desk, and stood slowly. My body felt like glass, holding its shape, but only just. The thing about uncovering a lie is, once you do, everyone stares like you're the one who changed. At 1312, my access badge failed again, this time at the cafeteria. I walked around to the back through maintenance. In the hallway, I passed Officer Lennox. He looked at me like he'd seen a ghost. Perjury review, I said flatly. That phrase mean anything to you? He didn't answer, but I saw the tremor in his jaw. You better pray the marshal's office calls you first, I added, because if they don't, they'll just arrive, with paperwork. He looked like he wanted to say something, maybe even apologize, but I didn't want the apology. I wanted the truth, and I wanted Rowe. They reached for power through corruption, but they forgot I learned to track corruption with a clipboard and a paperclip. The office printer chirped 3 times and jammed again. A hiss, a pause, a red blinking light. It was almost funny how these machines always break when you're seconds away from proof. But this wasn't about toner or misfeeds. This was about the print queue marked D14 and the shadow file routed through it at 06:59 a.m. I opened the printer's internal log panel. A clunky gray menu only accessible with a master override. Maintenance usually handled it, but I'd watched them do it enough times to know the sequence. Hold clear for 5 seconds. Press menu, scroll to job history, and enter the service pin. It blinked, then opened. There it was. Job ID, DAS 98721. File name, review, cleaned, MP4 time, ZO65924. User, system, authorized override route, internal secure queue destination, D4E, row. But what caught my eye wasn't just the file name, it was the payload size, 13.7 megabyte. A standard 12-second hallway clip from camera 12, even in high resolution, wouldn't exceed 5 megabytes. This file had layers. I sent the log as a screenshot to my own encrypted email, again off-network. Then I printed the job history itself. Not the footage, just the metadata. Paper still carried weight when everything else could be edited. As I folded the page into my case folder, I saw Roe. He was standing by the water cooler, fake laughing with a rookie, looking like gravity never touched him. My blood burned, not with rage, but precision. The kind of cold clarity that makes you draw a line and never look back. I walked up to him, slow, calculated, not aggressive, just loud enough to be noticed. "Captain Rowe," I said. He turned, that rehearsed smile faltering. "Officer Keller, one quick question." I held up the printed log sheet like a badge. Why is there a transcoded file labeled Review Cleaned, routed through your assigned printer queue at 06:59 the morning you submitted altered footage to the prosecutor? His jaw twitched. And why does that file match an archived clip from 2019 training footage? Eyes were on us now. The bullpen grew quiet. He exhaled, long and slow, but said nothing. "Because right now," I added, "the U.S. Marshal's Office is matching timestamps on chain of custody violations, and you've got ink on your hands." He stepped toward me, lowering his voice. "You don't know who you're messing with." "Oh," I whispered, leaning in. "I know exactly who I'm cleaning up after." That was when the room changed. The marshal walked in, right on cue, suit, badge, quiet authority. He scanned the room once, then walked straight to Roe. "Captain," he said, "you'll need to come with me." It was over in under a minute, no cuffs yet. But the silence was thunderous, and the sound of Roe's shoes on the tile as he followed the marshal out was louder than any siren. Back at my desk, I opened the chain of custody log. A new entry had been added, TVC 4070A, timestamp integrity violation confirmed. Primary suspect, Captain Roe. Status, under investigation, federal. I stared at the screen, not with relief, not yet, because the wound was deeper than one man, and the infection had spread into every form, every signature, every accidental email that had landed in my inbox the past month. But the first stone had been pulled, and the wall was starting to crack. They forged a reality to bury me, but I made their timestamp bleed. The break room had always been the quietest place in the building, not because it was sacred, but because no one trusted anyone enough to eat in the same room anymore. I stood by the microwave, waiting for the hum to finish warming a paper cup of stale coffee. It wasn't about the drink. It was about time, about watching who walked past and who didn't. Crane entered without looking at me. He moved slowly, like he'd aged 10 years in 2 days. His badge hung crooked on his chest. "You heard?" I asked. He nodded. "Roe's out. Suspension pending investigation. IA's all over it." I watched him. No denial, no weak defense, just quiet defeat. And that was almost worse. "You changed your statement just in time," I said. "You might have saved your own job." He didn't respond right away. Then, didn't do it for me. I blinked. He looked up. They told me if I didn't fudge your timeline, I'd be reassigned to West Branch. Night watch? Zero mobility. You know what that does to a family. So, you picked survival, I said. Didn't realize until later I'd picked the wrong side. I believed him, not because of the apology, but because of the look in his eyes. It was the look of someone who realized they'd been used too. You're not the only one they pressured, he added. Lennox got overtime approvals after his statement. Morales got HR to lose a write-up from last month. They weren't protecting Roe. They were building a wall of debts. I straightened. And who handed out the bricks? He hesitated. I think it goes through legal, maybe higher. You know who signed off on the Export Authority override for D14? I narrowed my eyes. That wasn't Roe. Roe requested the footage, sure, but the override signature came from an assistant in legal services, Patricia Nance, quiet, almost invisible. I'd seen her, small woman, beige clothes, the kind of person who answers phones with one word and never raises her voice. You'd never suspect her of forging a chain of custody unless you watched the way her eyes never blinked when you said timestamp. I finished my coffee, tossed the cup. Where is she now? Crane looked down. Out sick. Of course she was. I left the break room and walked back to archives, where Sylvia was already waiting. She didn't look surprised to see me. I need something new, I said. Chain of custody export signatures for camera 12, specifically legal overrides. She handed me a folder, already pulled. Inside, a printed spreadsheet of metadata, names, times, IP addresses. One entry stood out, a manual override request made at SO 641 the day of the footage submission. Signed, P. Nance, title, Legal Assistant the Secu. Location, Workstation C7. But there was something else. Under the column labeled Justification, it simply read, Per prosecutor order, streamline review. But that was a lie, because Alvarez had already told me he never ordered a cleaned version. In fact, he hadn't reviewed the footage until after it was submitted. This was a backdated cover. Someone had used the prosecutor's name as a shield. And Nance, the quiet little assistant, had put it in writing. Now, it wasn't just about Roe. It was about the architecture, the invisible ink behind the system, the ones who didn't lie out loud but rewrote the margins until truth folded in on itself. I closed the folder and looked at Sylvia. This doesn't end with Roe. She nodded slowly. It never did. They forged signatures and silenced cameras, but I'm learning to read between the frames. The walls in legal services were a different shade of beige, warmer, friendlier, the kind of color you pick when you want people to trust you, or stop looking. But I didn't trust warmth anymore, and I definitely wasn't done looking. I walked past cubicles filled with half-dead plants and overly quiet keyboards. At the far end, Workstation C7 sat empty, neat, undisturbed, as if Patricia Nance had evaporated mid-keystroke. But her monitor was still on, locked of course. I didn't need access, I just needed the sticker. Most people didn't realize IT tracks devices not just by login credentials, but by MAC address, a digital fingerprint every device broadcasts. I'd seen enough network traffic maps to recognize hers. C7 had uploaded a 13.7 MB file at 0659 to the internal secure queue, routed through the D14 printer. It wasn't Roe who initiated the export. It was Nance, and she'd used someone else's name to sign off the action. Prosecutor Alvarez. Only now, with the Marshal's investigation officially in motion, the falsified signature had started to echo, reverberate, because Alvarez had filed a formal complaint, and that meant a subpoena. I left legal services and headed toward the Office of Internal Affairs. The hallway outside was lined with frosted glass and people who never smiled. A place where truth went to be processed, not protected. But I had leverage now. The logbook, the MAC address trace, the override file signed with a name that didn't belong to her. I waited 10 minutes before they called me in. The IA officer, Jensen, wore the look of someone who didn't expect to be impressed. He gestured to the chair. "Officer Keller, you're not under investigation at this time, but I advise you to be precise." I placed the paper folder on the table. Inside are logs from Camera 12's export queue, metadata showing a file submitted not by Captain Rowe, but by Patricia Nance. She forged Prosecutor Alvarez's name in the justification field. Jensen didn't blink. She routed the footage through D14 Rowe's printer to tie the origin to him, but the export IP matches hers, workstation C7. I leaned forward. She staged the submission, but the plan wasn't hers. It was built to protect someone higher, and she was the firewall. He finally looked up. "And who do you think she was protecting?" I slid the second page across the table. A list of secured access approvals from the past 90 days. Nance had override authorization, yes, but someone else granted it. Supervisor approval code, LSM 9472. Name, Sergeant Thomas Veach. Title, Liaison, Legal Compliance Veach. He wasn't visible. He didn't show up on most org charts, but his signature had surfaced before, on temporary assignment papers, on budget reallocations for camera maintenance, always quiet, always buried in the third paragraph. But what made my skin crawl was this. 3 months ago, he'd signed off the decision to limit Camera 12's storage buffer from 48 hours to 18. That was before any of this began, before the accusation, before the impossible sighting. And yet, he'd prepared the timeline to erase itself. Jensen sat back. "That's a serious accusation." "No," I corrected him. "It's a trail of digital fingerprints wrapped in procedure, pointing to someone who thought erasing hours was the same as erasing truth." I left the folder. As I exited, I passed the same frozen faces. But one of them blinked this time. Alvarez. He was waiting in the hallway, coat folded over one arm. "You were right," he said simply. "It wasn't Rowe's order." "I know." "Marshall's following the chain upward. Veach is next." I nodded, but I didn't feel victorious, because if Veach planned it, someone asked for it, and that person still hadn't surfaced. They designed the lie like architecture, layers of silence, walls of protocol, doors without handles. But I finally found a window. The rain hit the glass like a metronome of warnings. I stood by the edge of the parking lot, watching puddles form around the base of the security cameras. Funny how the eyes of the building could get waterlogged, but mine were wide open now. At 081, I received an internal alert from the system I'd been secretly monitoring. The printer queue watch, Sylvia, helped me rig with a bypass script, another export attempt, same pattern, system, external override. But this time, the file wasn't from Camera 12. It was Camera 6, south stairwell, a different angle, a new lie. I rushed inside. Elevator was too slow. I ran the steps 2 at a time. When I reached the 3rd floor, the light outside IT services blinked red. Badge access disabled. Again, no time. I slipped into the server room through maintenance, an old back panel from the HVAC side, long since forgotten by facilities. I crouched beside the terminal, heart pounding. The system logs confirmed it. 0658 export initiated source, camera, 6 stairwell user, system, override via admin proxy C7 destination, printer, QD14 again, printer, D14. But there was a new name tied to the job. Not Rowe, not Nance, Veach. He'd stopped hiding behind assistants. He was initiating it himself now. Only this time, the footage showed me speaking to Alvarez in the hallway. A scene that never happened. because at that moment, I was in the review room with the marshal. They weren't just trying to discredit me anymore. They were trying to discredit evidence, erase the timestamp trail, rewrite presence, corrode the backbone of the case, not with force, but with shadows pretending to be clarity. At 09:10, I met Alvarez in the internal interview room. No cameras, no recorder, just ink and pressure. "They've started another file," I said. "South stairwell, camera 6, they're manufacturing new gaps." He didn't look surprised, just tired. "You have proof?" "I have the log," I said, sliding the sheet across the table. He read it once, twice, then leaned back. "This has left my hands." "What does that mean?" He met my eyes. Marshal's office escalated. DOJ just authorized a full federal integrity audit. Everything's being frozen. Hard drives, access logs, emails, they're flying in tonight. I sat still, afraid even to exhale. "You built a case bigger than you," he said. "Bigger than Roe, bigger than Veach." I didn't feel powerful. I felt exposed. "Will they come after me?" Alvarez didn't blink. "They already did. You're still standing?" I left the room and walked slowly back to my desk. I passed the copier. It was jammed again, page half spit into the tray. I pulled it out, a half-printed log of the camera 6 override. Their second lie, interrupted, and I smiled. For the first time in weeks, I smiled. They kept printing versions of me that never existed. But one corrupted page was enough to shred the whole illusion. The conference room on the 5th floor had never felt this cold before. Maybe it was the presence of the 3 federal investigators, or maybe it was the absence of excuses. Either way, the temperature wasn't the only thing dropping. One of the marshals, tall, quiet, with sharp gray eyes, slid a folder across the table. His voice was even, but it sliced straight through me. "Your footage logs, Officer Keller, you were right. Camera 12 was compromised, camera 6 as well." He opened the folder, revealing a forensics report. Digital forensic summary, incident ID TVC 47, camera, 12 file had non-native metadata tags inserted at 0658.14. Video frames spliced using archived onboarding footage from 2019, MAC address match, workstation C7, Patricia Nance, submission approval signed by SGT, Thomas Veach. Conclusion, coordinated fabrication of evidence with intent to obstruct federal review. My hands didn't shake, not anymore. The wariness had calcified into focus. They tried to wipe me from the timeline, but they'd left digital fingerprints on every lie. "Is Nance in custody?" I asked. "Detained for questioning," the marshal replied. "Veach was intercepted at the airport this morning. One-way ticket, Toronto?" Coward. Of course he ran. People like him don't stay to explain. They disappear, betting that chaos will fog the truth long enough for them to vanish. But this time, the trail was too wide, too sloppy. The marshal continued, "We also found a pattern. This wasn't their first attempt. They used similar override patterns in 2 other cases from the last fiscal year. But yours was the first that fought back." I swallowed hard. "Because I know where the printers hide." He almost smiled. Then Alvarez entered the room. He looked different, no longer neutral. Now he looked like a man who'd seen what rot looks like up close, and couldn't unsee it. "You're not the target anymore," he said. "You're the witness." That word, witness, had been poisoned in my mouth for days, twisted by false testimonies and red-stamped lies. But now it felt clean, sharp. They gave me paperwork, a sealed folder, instructions, protection clauses, a meeting scheduled with DOJ oversight next week. I signed what needed to be signed. I didn't flinch because I was done blinking. As I left the room, I passed by Crane. He stood in the hallway, hands in his pockets, looking like someone who'd survived a storm, but still didn't know what day it was. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. The elevator ride down was quiet. On the ground floor, the receptionist, a new one, handed me a slip of paper. It was folded once, my name scrawled across it in rushed ink. Inside, just one sentence. They weren't after you. They were afraid of what you might find next. No name, no signature. But I knew who sent it. I walked outside. The sun was out for the first time in 5 days, and I didn't need surveillance to confirm it, because I was exactly where I said I'd be. They built their whole plan on the assumption that no one would watch the watchers. They never expected the footage to turn on them. There's a different silence that follows when the system admits it was wrong, not an apology. Systems don't apologize, but a recalibration, a glitch that exposes the architecture behind the facade. 3 weeks later, I sat in a federal briefing room with pale walls, a silver kettle of burned coffee, and 2 attorneys whose suits didn't quite fit right. My nameplate read, "Witness Verified." It felt like a strange badge of honor for surviving a war no one saw coming. The marshal was there too. Same man, same gray eyes. He handed me a folder, thicker than the last. Internal Affairs finished their full review, he said. 34 documented override incidents, 12 unreported footage edits, 5 witness statements under federal review for perjury, 3 promotion decisions traced directly to falsified chain of custody records. And then, the last line, full unit audit ordered, pending federal supervision. The unit I'd spent 8 years in was now under glass. I expected to feel victorious. I didn't. I felt necessary. Because this wasn't about me anymore. It never had been. They hadn't just tried to bury my timeline. They'd been rewriting others, quietly, efficiently for years, victims without voices, cases adjusted just enough to shift burden, reframe blame, redirect justice. And they'd gotten away with it. Until someone asked for the raw footage. Until someone checked the printer queue. Until someone refused to disappear. I walked past the holding room where Patricia Nance now sat, head low, hands folded like someone still trying to pretend her signature wasn't forged in malice. Veach was gone, held in federal custody in another state. Rowe had lost his pension. Lennox resigned. Crane was cleared but transferred. Sylvia got promoted, and me? I was offered relocation, witness status, even a quiet job behind a desk in records. But I said no, because I'd spent too long cleaning up lies. I wanted to build something honest, or at least make it harder to lie again. They assigned me to the Timestamp Integrity Division. Not glamorous, not loud, but permanent. Every morning, I enter the room where time has to prove itself. I audit what others sign without reading. I trace frames back to their origin. I watch the watchers, and sometimes I watch the footage of myself in that hallway, erased from the official logs, still walking, still there, still whole, because I never needed the system to validate my presence. I just needed it to stop lying about my absence. They tried to erase me with cameras. Now I hold the key to every timestamp they thought they'd rewritten. And this time, I'm not turning away.